He was New Bedford's first poet laureate, 1994 to 1998. He is the author of 3 books of poetry, and over the decades he had his work published in over 100 periodicals and anthologies. I could go on. You're a man who's won many awards around the world, and I really want to ask you a question that's completely off the bat, but what is it to be a learned African-American man in America today?
Well, it demonstrates to you and for you how much more you have to learn, because the older I get, the more I'm convinced that we're all citizens of the earth, that the whole world and all of human history and heritage, no matter where, is our birthright as human beings to explore, to become enriched by, to appreciate. And that includes music, art, agricultural techniques, sciences, all kinds of cultural, scientific traditions, that everything. One of the themes of this wonderful, wonderful conference and the even more wonderful organization behind it is the fact of something that all poets know. Poetry can, and the best poetry often does, make connections. In the service of that, we have similes, which make direct connections. We have metaphors, which make indirect connections. We have symbols, which make symbolism, which makes for connections. And it is those poems that, especially the ones that are accessible, that make use of connecting agents within their texts. They're the ones that people tend to remember, like Langston Hughes' What Happens to a Dream Deferred. The metaphorical dream, you understand? William Blake's great poem, London, which is the first great lyric protest poem in English. Interestingly, Hughes's poem, Harlem, is a one-word place name title 2 centuries after William Blake's London. And I use them in poetry writing. I used to use them in poetry writing one-on-one. But everything is connected to everything else. Everything is connected. And that is one of the things that I wanted people to get from the piece I read at the opening of our modest program, Ocean Voices, titled Invocation, the short poem that I read. I mean, after all, it is Sunday morning. It was 11 o'clock. And ordinarily, I'd be at First Unitarian Church. Well, not necessarily ordinarily, because I don't go to church every week, far from it, as a matter of fact. But I'm aware of the fact that quite a few people in the audience go to some worship service or not. There were, I know that, happen to know for a fact there were Quakers in the audience, Unitarians in the audience, other Protestants, Catholics, etc., Jews, and some Buddhists. Yes.
So, would you tell us about Ocean Voices?
Yes, Ocean Voices is an anthology coming out of Spinner Publications, our own award-winning small press in New Bedford, Massachusetts. It is an anthology that is broken into subsections under the headings By the Sea, On the Sea, In the Sea, From the Sea, and the Sea of Love. The authors run the gamut, from the words of William Shakespeare down to the local poets you heard this morning, and quite a few major poets in between, especially 19th century greats. The father of modern poetry, Walt Whitman, has a poem in the book. The mother of modern poetry, Emily Dickinson, has a poem in the book. I have the poetry of, I'm the editor, and so when I say I really mean we, have 2 Nobel laureates, Derek Walcott and Pablo Neruda, in the book. Neruda and Walcott, very much ocean poets, you know. So we're looking forward to it coming out later this fall, later this season.
Could you say a few lines of poetry that are really dear to your heart, that would connect us with the people who are listening to us online?
Okay, well, why don't I do this? I'd like to do two short pieces by Langston Hughes, because Langston Hughes wrote poetry that helped to change America. His systematic use over 4 decades of the metaphor of the dream, not the one involved with sleep, but the one that's about human aspiration, had profound impact, I know for a fact, on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, for which King had several dry runs. And I heard King, I stood behind Dr. King in the glee club of my alma mater in June of '61 when he gave the baccalaureate address at Lincoln University, which graduated Langston Hughes in the 1920s. And I said, how wonderful Hughes must feel to hear that metaphor being used so purposefully, you know, at the height of the modern civil rights movement. If people know nothing else about Martin Luther King or about the civil rights movement, they know that speech. That speech is the seed for that speech is Langston Hughes' poem, Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and run? Maybe it sugared over like a syrupy sweet, or does it stink like rotten meat? Perhaps it sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? We know that human frustration can explode, okay? So when I heard Dr. King give this speech called An American Dream, knowing that one of our most famous alumni had written a poem in the 20s called Dreams, had written a collection of poems called The Dreamkeeper, had written a poem often anthologized, I Dream a World, decades before that speech, I knew that, and then you hear in terms of his informal commentaries that Martin Luther King was very fond of Langston Hughes' poetry. No kidding, yeah. And so we have a poem that lent itself to helping to change America for the better. Another one, of course, would be the so-called Negro National Anthem, which was the poem Lift Every Voice, which Kepra and Candida had in their program earlier this morning. Candida intoning it sonorously and so beautifully and so inspiringly, yeah. But the other one is the simple one that hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams go, life is a barren field covered with snow. Now my grandsons have memorized that. Age 5, each of them memorized that.
I just want to ask you, what do you, it's not so much what you think, but what do you feel about Barack Obama?
A lot. I'm very proud of him for obvious reasons. My great-grandmother lived to be 111. She was born before the Civil War, and she lived to see human beings go to the moon in good health. I often think what it might have done for her to have seen this man in the White House. I am very proud of what he's been able to do in a stand-up way despite the awesome antagonism arrayed against him. For those who thought that we had a post-racial America on the eve of his election, the rise of the Tea Party And it's like an organized attack on anything that he proposes, even things he proposes that were advocated by Republicans. They say no to because it's Barack Obama, it's the black man, the black president. And that's how they see them. You know, you see the bumper stickers around this country, even in Massachusetts, that's put the white back in the White House. You know? Contemptible. To me, the Tea Party is nothing but the Klan with the mask taken off. And a lot of people take exception with that. I don't care. But the mentality is very, very similar to the beginning of post-Reconstruction in the 1870s, which disenfranchised the recently franchised African Americans whose voting rights, whose civil rights were protected by federal troops. And of course, a deal was made by the southern bloc of ex-Confederate soldiers and their bosses with the man running for, with one of the candidates running for president. And he was told that if he would withdraw the federal troops from the South, which were protecting the freedmen and freedwomen, that they would vote as a bloc and he would be elected. They voted as he promised that would happen. They put him in office, and one of the first things he did was to withdraw federal troops from the South, and all hell broke loose. So the Klan was formed, and they reinforced white supremacy again, and they invented another form of slavery, a documentary by Slavery by Another Name, which is the chain gangs and the prison complex, but most dramatically the sharecropping became institutionalized throughout the South and kept cotton king, you know. I have disappointed, on the other hand, of the fact that he has been a little too lawyerly as far as I'm concerned. He is the great compromiser. He prides himself on working both sides of the aisle. He didn't have that luxury. The other side of the aisle was arrayed against him, determined to get him out of office by any means necessary. And still he reached out and et cetera, and all he did was get slapped. The first president, I think, in the history of the United States to be shouted at derisively during the State of the Union address, where the people from the South who loathed Lincoln respected the presidency enough not to do something like that, but then again, they hated him, but he was a white man. But for that character from South Carolina to yell out, "You lie," to the President of the United States, with every representative from each party and the full Supreme Court right there, and the man's wife right in the balcony, absolutely unforgivable, you know. But he had to proceed because he's the president of, as he reminds a lot of African Americans, of the whole United States. And so he's doing the job, and he's doing the job, I think, in a very creditable fashion. But you know, when he came out and told us that night of his election at the park in Chicago that we must keep up the momentum, that it's not up to me, that this is the beginning of a movement, I need you all behind me in order to get legislation to do the things that we want to do. And everybody had a good cry, and oh, it's a history-making moment, and then we hugged one another and we went home and let him do it. And you see what happened. We didn't bring that. I mean, what happened to put him in office was a realization of the Rainbow Coalition that Jesse Jackson had worked toward 2 decades before, you see. And I'm very disappointed on his position with regard to the embargo against Cuba. But ultimately, people have to understand this. This man is not the Messiah. He is not a magician. He is a canny, accomplished, still young politician. And politicians want to get reelected. And I'm hoping that as a lame duck, that he does something that will distinguish him as a statesperson.
Thank you very much for
You're welcome.
giving us your view.
We have to start thinking outside of the box of the two-party system too, because very frankly, the Democrats and the Republicans are just respectively the left and right wing of the same bird of prey. They really are. We've got to see, you know, why can't we have the presidential candidate for the Green Party to come to Bayonese? to give a keynote. Why not? Or the Socialist Party. Why not? What are other people thinking about? You know, we've got to get away from the Tweedledee, Tweedledum thing. Because as Ken said yesterday at his presentation at the Buzzards Bay Center, but we're in the red zone already. You know, we say we love our grandchildren and we care about the future. Well, how are we acting on that? When we passively get into our vehicles that are powered by this antique technology called an internal combustion machine, you know? And the water we waste by using too much water to flush our toilets. We have felled whole growth forests to wipe our behinds. We've got to change. There are things that we can do as individuals. And see, this conference brings in young people, not so young people, and reminds them of this. Points out that you can make a difference. Because nearly every person that Bioneers has as a keynoter, particularly the founder of Bioneers, you want to say, and Sister Matai from Kenya, they show what one person's capable of doing, what one person can initiate. And I would encourage anybody listening to this to read a poem by Marge Piercy entitled The Low Road. It's the best activist poem, short activist poem, that has ever been written in terms of what one person can do, what two people can do, what three, what a half dozen, it's a wonderful poem. The other is by another woman, Sonia Sanchez. All right? A poem for the March for Disarmament.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I appreciate it.